Welcome back to Grace Stories. This is Garrett, and we are so glad that you've joined us again, whether you're watching or listening on YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, share these, give us reviews wherever you're listening to the podcast, whether it's Spotify, Google, Apple. It can just help, people see what we're doing, some of these conversations. And also, I would strongly encourage you, if you're listening to this one, go back and listen to some of the others. There's definitely some that you haven't heard. And I think that they're all great personally. And so, just if you've got the time, go back, like them, review them, whatever it takes, whether it's on YouTube or wherever you're listening. And this week, we have Krista Reimer. We are talking, I wanted to get her on so that we could talk a little bit about what some of this has been like for her currently as a teacher, but also, getting a few other things to talk about. And so, I just want to say first, thanks for coming on and doing this, especially because you came just right after you finished, doing school and work and everything. And so I appreciate you taking the time. One of the first questions that I wanted to ask you is what motivated you to become a teacher, and what was that process like, and what was that journey like for you?
Yeah. So I think for the longest time, I can't ever really remember a time that I didn't want to be a teacher. So even as a little kid, I remember playing school at home or with my friends. We had one of those old overhead projectors that we would play with all the time. We loved it. And I had a lot of good teachers growing up that I really looked up to, and they played a big role in my life. And so I just never imagined I would do anything else. Mm-hmm. So it was a really easy decision coming wherever I ended up wanting to go to school. I always knew it was going to be education for sure. So.
Yeah, I think, sometimes people have those moments where they're like, oh yeah, I always wanted to be, a firefighter or teacher or nurse or, that was not the case for me growing up. I didn't think that I would be doing anything like this, but, you talk about always wanting to do it and doing it regardless of kind of where you ended up. And I'm sure that was,
right.
On not only what you were teaching or who you were teaching, but also the process of where you were going to develop that skill set and learn those things.
Right, yeah.
And so, knowing that you were going to be a teacher, that you wanted to be a teacher,
yeah.
What steps did you take? Where did you go to start developing those skills and doing some of that stuff to prepare?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, they actually had a program where we could intern at a certain, like, if you were wanting to be an accountant or something, you could go intern at a position like that. And so at my high school, they had a partnership with our elementary school. And so I would go, I don't even remember how many days a week, but I would go, and I was in the same class, and I would go on a regular basis and just be with the kids, and the teacher would give us different responsibilities and how we could help out in the classroom and things like that. And I loved it. It was so fun to just, build relationships with kids and, but also start to see things from the teacher side of things, because I had only been a student up to that point. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where it started. And then, choosing to come to Oklahoma Wesleyan. They have an amazing education program, and just at my very first semester, I was in classrooms here in Bartlesville and just getting a lot of experience of, shifting your perspective from a student to then being a teacher, and just what that kind of looks like. And it was awesome. Mm-hmm.
So going to Oklahoma Wesleyan, a Christian college, and choosing to do some of those things, through your high school, how much did your faith influence some of those decisions that you made, or, some of the things that you did leading up to where you are now?
Yeah. I think I've always known that like I've had a gift to work with children and to work with families, and that's always been a big thing on my heart of like connecting with the younger generation and just building relationships with them and leading them. I know, like looking back in my younger years, I had a lot of people that did that in my life, and so it was really encouraging. Even, teachers that necessarily didn't go to church with me or I didn't have many, faith connections with, I still really looked up to those people, and I knew that I could trust them and learn from them. And so, so with my faith, I saw an opportunity there are people that will look up to me, or I hope would look up to me in a positive way that I could, lead from a Christian perspective and from just an outlet that not everybody would have, like for a teacher, we spend 6-7 hours a day with these kids every day, and that's a lot of time in their day. And so just the impact it's a big impact that a teacher could have on a child. And so I love getting to connect with kids in that way and just have a steady, routine, structured relationship with them. But it gives a lot of opportunities to share my faith and to share my perspective on life a little bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, you talk about looking up to some of these, educators and adults in your life. And I think that a lot of people think that something, the word that you use in Christian circles is discipleship, a lot. And that act of imparting, something to train someone up to do something. I think that a lot of people can look at something like discipleship and say that it has to be, this narrow set of things, and it has to happen in a certain context. It has to happen maybe in a church or in a small group or one-on-one. And I think that, and you can probably speak to this more than I can, but the idea of being present with a group of students for that long, day after day, there's something to that where you're helping shape the way that they're responding to certain situations. Some of that's, going to be academic, but I'm sure a lot of it is just the way that maybe they're responding to, certain stress in their life or, maybe a bad grade or whatever.
Absolutely.
And for a kid, that could probably be just as traumatic as, anything else for an adult.
Yeah.
And so, did going to a school like Oklahoma Wesleyan kind of shape like any thought processes like that for the way that you operate as a teacher?
Yeah. So there were several classes, we had to take like our Old Testament, New Testament, those core classes, but in all of our education classes that we took, there was always a piece of like, okay, how can we connect what we're learning into our Christian perspective, into our Christian worldview? Like how, what opportunities can we provide our kids who, don't come from Christian homes and who we don't always have access and the freedom to say like, hey, this is what I believe, And so it was, I felt like I was definitely prepared to say like, I walked into classrooms knowing I can share my faith. I don't have to be, straightforward and very vocal about what I believe or, theologically or things like that, but I can always show them in different ways and in different actions and with how I say things and how I treat them. And just continually pointing back to like Jesus' grace and his forgiveness and his love. Like there's so many opportunities to show his grace every day at school. Things like that I felt very prepared for.
Yeah. When you're in a setting like this in a church, it's super easy to just kind of, go off on, for us as a staff, I could, talk about whatever during prayer that we have in the mornings or whatever. And I can be, as direct as I want to be. And we can talk about things in a very direct way, reference scripture and all that thing. And, and for people that may not know, teaching in a public school, public setting, where you don't have the flexibility that you might even in a private school, a private Christian school.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the fact that you're talking about, being able to share not necessarily with what you're explicitly saying, but with what you're implicitly doing as a teacher, and how you're acting and responding and modeling that for the kids that are coming in.
Right.
And I think that, that there's precedent there in the Gospels. So much of what you're seeing Jesus do in the Gospels, it's not always just him saying something, but a lot of times it's what he does, what he chooses to do, what he chooses not to do. And so for people who maybe it's hard for them to think about that, or they're thinking, well, if you want to teach from a Christian perspective, why don't you do that at a Christian school? Maybe share a little bit about what made you decide to teach in the setting that you're teaching in.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So when I first came to school, to college, I loved the atmosphere of Wesleyan Christian School or a smaller, more private setting like that. But as I got further along in my education at school, and I did my student teaching at Kane Elementary, where I'm teaching now, I just had a new eye-opening experience of seeing all of the brokenness that families and students and, brokenness is everywhere, but I just felt my heart really being pulled toward this group of people. And, just seeing how much love and grace and structure and routine and, they needed. And I just felt so called to be in that public school setting where, like I said, there's brokenness everywhere, but I just love to get to be a part of just bringing that hope to them every day. I felt like the Lord was definitely calling me to be in a public school setting where I could be a light and I could be just a little bit more of not more of a brightness, but a different kind of brightness in these families' lives and in that type of setting.
So how, and you can talk about this in a little bit, but given how long you've been teaching and the fact that you chose to teach at Kane, and you've probably got a good mix of students from different backgrounds.
Absolutely.
What were some of the earliest challenges that you had? Maybe it was a discouraging moment or something that you just even, going to school for 4 years, and I think this is just true for anyone that's working. You get into a job and there's things that just no amount of education can prepare you for.
Yeah.
And so what were some of those moments like, and what have you done in the time that you've been teaching to try and adapt to some of those challenges?
Right. Yeah. So I grew up in a really small town in Kansas, and we had a lot of it was such a small, we had what we needed, and there wasn't a lot of, need, I would say. So coming from that prior and then going into a bigger setting of Bartlesville, it's not huge, but a lot bigger than I was used to. My eyes were really open to just the amount of brokenness and needs that were not being met here in our city. And so one of the most discouraging and disheartening things for me my first year of teaching was just some of my kids, they just didn't have food. And so we would always, I'd find stuff and send it home every night with them just because I knew they weren't eating. Or, I had kids that were taking care of their siblings before they would come to school. And so they were late every day. And, it's easy to get on to a kid why are you late? And then you realize, oh my goodness, they're having to dress their baby sister and take her, and so things like that were really discouraging to me because I couldn't quite grasp how I am supposed to not only educate these kids and help prepare them to pass a state test or to go on to the next grade, but they don't have their basic needs met. And so it was this hard line of, okay, how do I start with that? Because I know they're not learning if they're not being fed and sleeping and things like that. So it was a really hard balance for me. And it still is, it's a hard line to, cram all this information in every year, but really they just need some food and they just need some love. And so, yeah, that's always a hard, tricky balance I think every teacher experiences. But yeah, that's something that it sits heavy on my heart. And I'm always trying to figure out different ways to meet their needs first before I teach them.
Yeah. And I think, when you get into towns like, Bartlesville, where it's not massive, but it's not small enough where, there's 6 elementary schools, and everything's split up into districts. And so, what some parents and kids may experience at one school may be completely different than another school. My mom is a administrator in Ponca City. And so I grew up, she was an elementary school teacher. Yeah. And so, I grew up knowing about some of these things and being exposed to, what is free and reduced lunch and what does that mean? And why do those kids have to have it and we don't?
Right.
And also, hearing my mom talk about how a lot of families, it's becoming more and more of a problem now than it was even, 10 or 20 years ago. And some of that has to deal with the economy and companies moving around and doing things like that. But I think, it's just another fact is just, some families just don't have the same advantages and opportunities and maybe those parents weren't educated in ways to care for their families, and they weren't given the opportunities that they needed.
Right.
And so you enter into all of these issues, but I think that it's great that there are people like you that are willing to, sacrifice, whether that's to sacrifice time or money, to try and reach out, to kids. And, so you obviously can spend a lot of time thinking about the hard things, but what have been some of the really positive things that have happened? And maybe it's because of those interactions, or maybe it's something entirely different, but what have been some of the things that, maybe some of these things are hard and you think about them when you're sleeping at night, but there are other things that get you up out of bed in the morning and you're like, I can't wait for this thing to happen.
Right. Absolutely. I love my favorite part of the day is, and I'm teaching virtually this year. So I don't have kids in my classroom this year, and it's what I miss the most about not having kids in my room. But that morning, so at Kane, we have breakfast every morning in our classroom where every kid gets breakfast. And it's so great to have, everybody has their food and we all have our little spot. And I usually sit down and eat breakfast with them every day. And it is just the most life-giving time, because just checking in on them, and they're so excited to be at school, most of them, usually in the mornings, and everybody's waking up and just getting to talk about all right, here's what today's going to be like, or what was going on last night at home, what was something positive that you have to share, or we usually have a joke of the day, or different things like that. And that it's just that community time with my class. It's like a little family. Every morning we get to eat breakfast together, and I love that. And I think the kids, they get to interact with each other at that point, and kind of gets them focused on and okay, we're here. And I love that I feel like it creates a safe environment for them. And they get to know their classmates that way. They get to know me that way, and they realize oh, she's a normal person. She's not, you look at your teacher but yeah, I want them to see I do life just like they do life. And I eat breakfast too, things like that. I don't live at the school. So like I get to talk to them about things that they might not have experienced, or like they don't get to go do, or things like that I get to share with them, and just build community like that. So,
yeah, I think that, and when you think about what at least makes me think about is the fact that there's so many moments where Jesus, when he's interacting with his disciples and the apostles, and it's, so often it's over a meal. And you think about, the Last Supper being a meal and being a significant meal, but I think that there's something to be said of just sitting down and kind of, breaking bread, so to speak, with, these people, because you guys, at a level are doing life together, spending so much time in the same place. Right. And so, I think that it's huge to look at ways, even small things like that, because I think there's probably a lot of people that think, eating whatever, powdered eggs and gravy isn't that big of a deal. But for some of those kids, and for yourself, I mean, that can be, maybe the most significant moment in that day or in that week even. And so, I think that there's something to be said of, appreciating something that can look mundane or look simple, and realize that it maybe has more significance than you realize. So you hinted a little bit, and I'm sure that there's plenty to talk about with this, but you hinted about, doing class virtually now. But I kind of want to back up a little bit. For us in Oklahoma, I remember, I believe when things started shutting down, it was right around spring break.
Yes, it was right after spring break. Yes.
And so if you could talk a little bit about what that was like. You're getting ready for, I'm sure, testing and a lot of different things like that.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, everything just gets flipped on its head. And so if you could share a little bit about what that was like for you.
Yeah, so it was. So about 2 weeks before spring break, our district administrators asked the grade level coordinators, which I serve as the third grade level rep in the district. We had a meeting and they sat us down, and it was an all-day meeting, and we were like, I don't know what this is about, but we kind of were like wondering, and they told us they had given us the task to write I think at the time it was just 2 weeks of distance learning lesson plans for the district to use if we didn't come back after spring break. And I remember sitting at that meeting thinking, there's no way, like, what a waste of time. Like, nobody's going to use these. I'm spending my whole day here. Like, and then it happened. We used those lesson plans and many more. So leaving, I was, over spring break, you kept hearing more and more. And then, we finally got news, like, we're not coming back to school. That, it was a week at a time at that point, I think. And so, it was really disheartening to think, at the time, you thought, oh, it'd be a couple weeks, and then we jump right back. And we were so worried about, because, in third grade is the big state test for reading, and that my kids would come back and they'd have to take the test right away after being gone for 4 weeks. And, that was worrisome. But more than that, I was worried for my kids. Like, are they getting fed? Are they in a safe place? Do they have what they need to be okay? And things like that. And so, we didn't check in. We weren't like really not supposed to, but we did not start checking in with our classes and stuff until 2 weeks after that spring break. And that whole 2 weeks, we were getting lesson plans ready to do virtual. And but basically that whole time for me specifically was just a whole like, oh my, it was very overwhelming. It was hard to, not be there for them, and to always wonder, like, are they safe? Are they, how are they? And so, it was a really stressful time for sure for teachers, because, we'd never taught virtually before, and, how are we going to get our lesson plans to these kids, and how are, just passing, their worksheets or whatever they had out, and things like that was just, it seemed like an impossible task. And it nearly was, but we made it. It was great. So once we were able to start checking in with our kids and stuff, and, we would do Zoom calls and Google Hangouts and all of these different things that we could do to get kids on and see their faces. And really, we were just doing our best to keep them safe. And, and for some kids, we were able to like give assignments to and post lessons for and things like that. But for some of our kids, it was just like, hey, have you eaten today? Like, here's where you can go get food, like things like that. That just, making sure they were safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about online education, they don't think about the fact that really for a lot of, especially, the younger a kid gets, I think the harder it can become.
Right.
There's a precedent for online learning when you're thinking about college, or even, some high school where it's like, every once in a while, someone's going to take an online class, even if they're, on campus somewhere. But I don't think a lot of people thought about how maybe, and this may not be the best word, but how possibly unprepared a lot of teachers
absolutely
were to think about how can I adapt a classroom to doing some of these things online, and also thinking about the fact that if you're in a college or even some other grades, like you talked about, maybe they don't have a lot of standardized tests that they have to worry about.
Right.
But it adds another layer of, oh no, I've got to get all this stuff online, and are they going to be behind? Or are they going to have to do things over again next year?
Right.
So I think talking about that maybe helps give people a little perspective on, choosing to do something like that isn't the easy choice.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's not always, the decisions aren't always going to be made because it's the easiest for the educator.
Right.
Because obviously it would be much easier to do things in person. You're losing so much. But I think a lot of people in different industries had to sacrifice some things in order to be able to serve,
right,
the greatest number of people. And so, as you're kind of finishing up that school year and entering into summer, what were you thinking about, especially in terms of, these past couple weeks and starting school back up again?
Yeah. So I feel like our district did an amazing job of kind of being very proactive about, here's what we could be looking at in the fall, and even in May, we were having those conversations about, all right, this might not be over. Whereas I'm like, oh, surely we'll start normal in August. Like, this is crazy. Why are we still talking about this? But they were like, this could be a very real possibility. And so during the summer, they had us on teams, like the district level reps and different leaders and administrators in our district. We were all working together to basically revamp all of our curriculum to make it virtual in the case that we would do distance learning. And so, my entire summer, I taught summer school in June virtually. And so it kind of got my foot wet. Like, I was like, okay, stepping into this with 13 kids, I can do that. And I learned a lot just from that. And then in July, I spent every day from, sun up till sundown, just working on lesson plans and making our curriculum so that we could put it virtually, and how can we teach this, and mapping out our skills and, all of those things that we normally do in person, and have already had done and finished, for in-person school, but making them so we can somewhat effectively teach them virtually as well. And so, it was a ton of work. I know there were so many across Bartlesville that worked so hard on that. But I am so thankful and grateful for like our administrators and like our principals who encouraged us in that, like, it'll be worth it. Like, it's so nice to have somewhat of a framework now to be looking at and using. And it's, we did our best and we jumped into it, and we, I feel like of all the time, like, we took full advantage of our summer to kind of get our bearings straight as we started the school year. And I'm so thankful we did, because who would have thought, I have 40 virtual kids in my class right now. And so, yeah, if I hadn't taken that time in the summer to do that, it'd be hard. So it still is hard, but it's different. So,
yeah. So, I think this should be said. Everyone in all these different, jobs, but I think especially when it comes to, some of these things that are so, focused on in-person gatherings, everyone's trying to figure it out at the same time.
Yes.
And I think that some people think that, well, it's your job, so you should just be able to just do it out of the gate.
Right.
And do it the way I want you to do it.
Yeah. Yes.
And, I know, I'm sure, you felt this. I know that your administrators and principals have probably felt it. I know because at times I've felt it where you are, trying your hardest and so worried about what are people going to think,
Absolutely.
or what are people going to do about X, Y, or Z, and am I making the right choice? But I think that there's wisdom in just saying, well, I'm gonna prepare for the worst case scenario, so that I can serve people in the best way possible, and hopefully I don't have to, but if I do, then it'll be there.
Right.
And I think that, just doing everything, to the best of our ability, especially as Christians, I think that it's something that, hopefully should show that A, you care about that thing, but B, that you believe that you're called to do something and you want to do it to the best of your ability.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's one of the things, getting to talk to so many different people about, their jobs or their vocations or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a faith in Christ, then I believe that thing is something that God's called you to do, because he's made you, he's wired you that way, and he's, gifted you in those ways. And then the Spirit can come and help us in those moments where it's like, I don't know what I'm doing or what's going on. And so, thinking about that and thinking too, we're only, maybe a month into this. What are some of the things that you're worried about, or some of the things that seem like, this is still an unknown, but I'm praying for the best circumstances?
Yeah. All of it. No, that's a great question. I think, even though we spent so much time in the summer, they're, just jumping into it and realizing all of the needs of my kids, like just educationally, this, like everything else aside, educationally, like, where some kids are way beyond third grade level, and some of mine are still, we're working on our sight words and like things like that, or like, I constantly have this pull between like, am I adequate? Like, am I enough for these kids? Am I, I don't feel like I'm enough. And this constant, like, I have to depend on the Holy Spirit to guide me in that. And, so that's a lot of hard, lots of tears and stress and overwhelming feelings of, constantly wondering like, okay, what can I do better? What can I, how can I better help them? But also knowing like, I have to just surrender, I know I'm doing my best and I'm giving what I can, but the rest, I've just learned like, okay, I have to surrender this, and the Lord will use me as I am here, So yeah, that's been a hard challenge, a hard thing to learn, I think, just seeing, just keeping up with everything and grading and taking parent phone calls and hearing like, this is too much. It's not enough. This is way too hard. This is so easy. Like, that's my whole day, is just like fielding all of these different issues, and then technology issues on top of that, So it's a constant. But yeah, so in that, I catch myself being really caught up in the like tasks and the to-dos and the I have to make this perfect and that. But then I'm just stepping back to realize, like, okay, why am I doing this? What am I here for? What's this purpose? What am I doing to serve these kids and these families? And realizing like, that's not just me, the Lord will use that as he does and as he will. So.
Yeah. And you talk about, talking a lot and I'm sure there's more of it than I could even, begin to comprehend, but talking to parents and all of that. And it was interesting to hear that you're doing all online with your students. I believe here in Bartlesville, there were options, for families to choose. I know a lot of Oklahoma schools are doing that and having kind of a hybrid option. Two of the things that I wonder about first is, knowing and obviously, school bonds and budgets have changed since I was in school, and every school system's different. But were there struggles with making sure that every student had access to a device or even internet connection?
Yeah.
Especially, there's probably a correlation between lots of kids who, maybe they're a part of a program like free and reduced lunch, then also not having resources to do online learning.
Right.
And this is, I think it's something that a lot of people didn't think about when you think about, having the opportunity to like work from home has become a thing. And a lot of those, the ability to do that is a privilege a lot of people don't have,
right?
Because of their resources. And then the other side of that is, if the kids have the resources, what is it like with different kinds of parents trying to make sure, that they are able to help them,
right?
Because you can only do so much remotely. So what have those things been like for you?
Yeah. So I don't want to say anything wrong here, but I know that the district provided, and there's been so many like donations and positive things our community has helped the school with to provide different resources for our kids. But all of our kids have Chromebooks, and if needed, they also have a hotspot that they were able to check out from the school. And so it was amazing, like just throughout from the spring until the summer. Last year we didn't have Chromebooks 1-to-1 for every kid, and by the fall we did. And so that was a huge push from the district level that just got those resources and everything we needed to all of our families that would have not normally had the resources to do something like virtual learning. And so, but it is a huge challenge to have, like a lot of, even in my virtual class, I have families that both of their parents work during the day, so some of these kids are going to work with their mom or going to work with their dad and trying to do school there and things like that, or, they're home with a sibling, or, it is hard. It's a whole lot of different scenarios. But yeah, I have kids like, they do their school in the evening when mom and dad are home, and so being flexible with that. And like, as a teacher, I'm not available in the evenings, because I need to have that time for me. And so how can I help them during the day if they have questions, if they're missing lessons and things like that. So just kind of working to be flexible with different families, but also coming from, I've realized like my viewpoint of that is like, oh, well, you have to be there during the school day. Like, of course you need to be at this lesson, but also learning to understand that I have to be flexible too. And just kind of learning, okay, that, there's nothing that these parents can do to change it. And so understanding that and seeing things from their perspective and showing grace in that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pause real quick because the electricity flickered. You may not have noticed in the video, but I'm going to make sure the cameras or the mics are still recording. Yeah, thinking about, all of these different families, and I know that, a lot of parents, that could be the concern is, oh, I've got to work, and we've got, obviously I'm not a parent. I don't know how it feels. Mm-hmm. I can sympathize maybe because, I do have to be here during the day, and there's a lot of stuff that I need to get done. I could imagine how hard it would be with kids to try and make sure that they're also learning.
Right.
Because, my wife and I work 8 to 5 mm-hmm. and we can't, be home a lot. And mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of people in our office who their kids are in school. And even those days where, maybe they're just home on a Friday and then they're in school the rest of the day. Even those Fridays can be difficult sometimes.
Absolutely.
And I've run into Jared with his kids, like working on schoolwork here because it's harder to do at home because, there's something to say about, having this space. I think, and you can speak more to this than I can. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of, instances biblically, but I think educationally as well, mm-hmm. where the importance of space, in the way that someone is developed, whether that's, through what they're learning or spiritually, is so important. And sometimes, if you're at home, it can be difficult mm-hmm. to try and retain information and learn something. And especially if you're a kid and, maybe the TV's right there or your dog's on the floor or whatever. And it, can totally just change the game for me, doing a master's degree remotely. Mm-hmm. I learned that there were certain places in my house that I couldn't do homework, and there were other places where I could do it. And mm-hmm. it was, for me being a little more disciplined and being an adult, mm-hmm. I was able to learn those things. But for a kid, and maybe even for the parents, it can be hard to start to figure out those things. Mm-hmm. So what has your experience been like, trying to convey things over a screen, mm-hmm. remotely, mm-hmm. where it can be easier for that kid to lose your attention?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that I learned very quickly was 10 minutes is tops. That's all I can get on a live call or something like that. So yeah. And, whereas in the classroom, it's so much easier to have, I like to have them all sit right up on the rug and we're all sitting doing it together, and I can keep them engaged. Like, okay, stand up, take a stretch break. Okay, let's get back to work, and things like that where I'm like right there in front of them and all right, take a break. I can see when they need a break and go take a break and then come back. And they're so much more able to stay engaged. But when they're at home, I don't have that control over, where they're at or, who needs a break at what time. And especially like our morning meetings, when there's 40 of them, I'm like, well, keep your microphone muted. Like that's all we can do. And so it's very much of a challenge. And so one thing that I have been doing is like recording lessons and having them posted so they could, if it didn't work the first time, go back and re-listen to it. Maybe it'll work the second time or things like that. But also still providing them with outlets like, here's a fun little dancing video, go take a break and go take 3 laps around your house or things like that. Mm-hmm. So we've definitely gotten creative of how to give kids some sort of outlet. But yeah, that I think it's a kind of a question that I'm constantly going back to, like, okay, how can I keep these kids engaged and focused? And because it's hard. It was hard for me to work from home. Thankfully, right now I get to work from my classroom, so I know I work better there, and so I can only imagine for these kids how hard it is to learn and try and do their schoolwork and at home, and who knows what kind of environment there. So yeah, that is definitely a challenge.
So thinking about that side of it, there's the other side of these kids being with, and some of them, it may not even be parents. Maybe it's a grandparent or another sibling. What have the interactions been like with some of those other people who, you're trying to help them, and in a way, what you're doing is, obviously teaching the kids, and it's a service to the kids, but at the same time, you're also, trying to help maybe some of these people develop some skills, whether that's learning how to operate the videos or the Zoom calls, or, even help engage with their homework. What have those interactions been like?
Yeah. So that was a hard thing for me, because it's like teaching, I know for me, like, teaching somebody how to use a computer is not a skill that I have. Like, it is something that's hard for me and I struggle with. And so, like, I just, want to jump in and do it for them, just get it done. And so that's kind of given me a little bit of a learning lesson there, showing lots of patience and grace in that. But yeah, it's like, just getting kids the first week of school, just getting kids logged in to their Chromebooks was all we could do about. And so, and then, all of the phone calls, like, well, this is happening when I do this, and I don't know what this button is, and all of those things, and trying to troubleshoot and everything. And then, you throw in assignments on top of that, and a meeting at this time. And it's very overwhelming for parents. I know, like, if I were a parent in that situation, I would have been so overwhelmed, and I was the one putting it on them. So it was this piece of, like, okay, how can we do this well? But yeah, so there was a lot of, at first, questions of technology and how does this work? And how does this work? And still, we're still working through that. Even today, I was on the phone with a parent, just walking them through how to turn in an assignment, things like that seems so easy to us sometimes, but yeah, it always is I have to step back and think from their perspective and realize, like, they've never had to do this before, and they wouldn't choose to do this either. And so it kind of, again, shifts my perspective back to theirs and helps me see through a different lens. So.
Yeah, for any educators out there that are older, for me, maybe for you, being able to operate some of this technology can be easy. But, maybe you've been teaching in a classroom for 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And it's like, all of a sudden now you're having to learn all these skill sets. And I'm sure there's plenty of things that you had to learn how to use that were a little different. Maybe, I don't know, it could have been things the district had prepared as part of what you were doing. But, I think that it's good to have someone, if those parents know, I can talk to the teacher and she's not going to be upset or short, and, knowing that she's going to be able to walk through it with me. I think that can begin to kind of change the mindset that people may have, and that's one of the things that I've experienced is learning, whatever it is. I mean, if you're trying to walk through a new skill set with someone, having the extra measure of patience is so important, but sometimes it's difficult.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you have to think outside of yourself and think, okay, what is this person going through? What are the emotions are they feeling? What are they experiencing? And what can I do to be a a place of comfort and not make the situation worse. And I think, when you're able to do that and you're adopting some of those mannerisms, then you're conveying Christ in those ways as well, to say, knowing that God is patient with us and he walks through the things that we're struggling with, in those ways as well. I think that it can help shift your perspective, and it could be the difference between maybe the way that you're interacting and someone else, maybe that they don't have that faith background and they might not, even want to try and have that extra measure of patience. So, kind of wrapping things up, for anyone who, maybe they're listening to this and, they, whatever it is, maybe they have, objections to, online learning, or, they have objections to, I know that there's plenty of people that, maybe they don't believe in the public school system or whatever it is. I mean, what would you say to some of those people, especially given the fact that you're in the middle of those things?
Yeah. So I think there's just different opportunities in all different places. And so different experiences and different backgrounds. And it's really cool that the Lord created, all of these different places. We have private schools and we have public schools and we have online learning now and we have in-ground learning. And each one of those places has a unique and a different opportunity for us to serve. And so I think, for me, I know my place is to serve in a public school, and whereas I could go be a private school teacher, or I could teach in a public school, or I could maybe homeschool someday, or anything of those types of things. The Lord, I think, just leads us where we are for a reason. And but I really love that, in this season, as a public school teacher for now, that I get to serve him in that way. And so I think it is cool to just take a step back and look at the different opportunities, no matter where you are. If your, kids are learning virtually, if you're home with your kids or whatever, there's opportunity in it all. And we all have a chance to serve the Lord, and it looks different for each of us, and it looks, very unique, in different seasons. But I think overall, it's really cool to see how the Lord just provides for you in those seasons and in those times, and wherever you are or wherever you choose to be.
Yeah, I think that, if you think about it in those ways, and you think about all of the options that people can have, the ultimate thing is, are students being developed, and does it really matter what option that is happening, as long as learning is taking place?
Right.
And some kids do better in other settings, and some kids, they don't thrive as well in certain circumstances. But I think that it helps to know that some of these things are, hopefully temporary.
Right. Yeah.
And that, you'll be able to return to a classroom one day.
Yeah.
And my opinion is that going through this and going through it well will help instill a measure of confidence, not only for you, but also for the students and
Right.
the confidence they have in you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To know that even though we were separated physically, my teacher still cared for me.
Yeah.
And she still reached out, and she still wanted to make sure I was doing okay and doing well. And I think, ultimately that's one of the more important things that whatever vocation you're in, it's important to know that you're doing your best, and that you're still trying to meet goals and do the things that you feel like God's wanting you to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
in the moment. So, thinking about all of that, what are your hopes for the future, this year in your classroom or, in classrooms and students that you're going to have in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this year I've learned a lot about how technology and some of the skills that we're doing right now with virtual, how we can bring some of that back into the classroom. So yeah, just like all of these different resources and things that we've received and are using now every day, it would be awesome to use with our kids while we're at school as well. And I think it'd be a really cool opportunity. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And for this year, who knows, there could be a chance that I go back in ground, at any time throughout the quarter. So yeah, it's so different, and it's like very up in the air as to what's next. But ultimately, I know like I serve a purpose, and I know the Lord will guide in whatever way, whatever happens. So now, is it easy to rest in that? No, but just being aware of that and reminding myself of that constantly is good. So,
well, I appreciate you taking the time to share some of that. And, hopefully there's a lot of you, listening that were able to, get something from this. And for us too here, I think there's a lot of things that, obviously, I've thought about it. If I could go back and keep all of this from happening, yes, certainly I would, because there's been so many terrible things that have happened, and so many crazy moments. But there are things that we've learned, that you learn as a body of Christ, that you learn as an organization or as a company or as an individual, to think, I didn't know this about myself. Right. And there's a lot to be said of God revealing something through, these traumatic events that maybe, I'm going to get to use that in the future. And I'm actually stronger for it. Right.
Absolutely.
So, I think, what you said, I think can apply to anyone, and encourage you to just try to do the best you can and to rest in God. And thank you for, taking the time to listen to this. I'm so privileged and honored that I get to have these conversations. If you're looking for more conversations like this, you can find them wherever you listen to podcasts by looking up Grace Stories. You can find them on YouTube. And right now we've got this is, I think, episode 13. So if you don't think you've listened to 13 of these, then I would strongly recommend that you go back, try to find some of the others. We're going to start trying to do these about every other week, because it's going to make it a little easier for me to find people to talk to and have these conversations with. But, comment, share, you can email, call, whatever. Let me know who else you think I should talk to, what else you'd be interested in hearing, what kind of stories you'd be interested in hearing. I've got a lot of ideas for the 25th anniversary and some of the things that we're going to be doing in our worship series coming up. But I'm just super glad that there are people connecting to this. I hope that this can impact even more people. And you can find, these and everything else online. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, at GCC Bartlesville, and you can find all of our links to everything and sermons and more on our website at gccbartlesville.org. And we will talk to you guys soon.